With Zach Lavine continuing to be in trade rumors and speculation this offseason, it makes you question how serious are the Bulls in actually wanting to move him for a guy who has really been involved in trade rumors or even just doubt on whether he can be that guy on a championship level team really from the very beginning of him joining this franchise as part of the Jimmy Butler trade. And while I've had people message me, do you think Zach Lavine is going to be traded? How credible are these rumors? Sending me trade proposals and packages for what a deal for Zach could look like. I actually think there is a bigger problem here with Zach being involved in all these trade rumors that we're not considering, and I'll explain why in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Real quick, if you're new to the channel or you've been watching for a while but you haven't been subscribed, if you like the content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subbed. It's about 52% of you watching are not subscribed. But anyway, let's get back into the topic at hand in Zach Lavine. So I'm sure, as most of you all know, Zach Lavine joined the Chicago Bulls as part of the Jimmy Butler trade back on draft night in 2017, which included himself, Chris Dunn, and the Wolves' number 7 pick, which the Bulls used to select Lauri Markkanen. Of course, Dunn and Markkanen are already gone and off the team, while Zach remains as the only piece left from that trade. And throughout Zach Lavine's time in a Chicago Bulls uniform, he's really been met with hot and cold, lukewarm reception from Bulls fans, even myself included. I mean, you guys know how critical I've been of Zach Lavine since starting the channel, and even before I had the channel. Not that anyone knew me at that time, but I was still critical of Zach. But the funny thing is, as critical as we all have been, Zach has got better with every passing season. From that first half season after coming back from tearing his ACL to being selected as a first-time All-Star, becoming an elite-level scorer and finisher at the rim, damn near coming close to the 50-40-90 club, improving his overall playmaking, and even to an extent his defense as well. Zach has proven his biggest critics wrong at every turn, but he still ends up in all of these trade rumors and also remains a very polarizing figure among Bulls fans. Whether it's we should have never traded Jimmy Butler for him, which it's not like he had any control over that, by the way. He's never going to be a #1 player on a championship team, to we should have never given him a max contract. He can't be relied upon in making smart plays in late game situations. We've heard it all. But yet, despite all of that, despite all the hate, he still remains one of the better players in the NBA. Who is still in his prime and a player that very much fits the prototypical mold of a player in today's NBA, with his three-point shooting, but a super athletic guy with a quick first step that can get to the basket and finish at the rim at will. Now, that said, when you do have a player that is as gifted as Zach on the roster, and you have to look at ways to go about making changes to the roster, obviously one way to do so is by trading your most tradable asset on the team. Like, even though I think the majority of people would say, not all, but the majority would probably say DeMar DeRozan is the team's overall best player, at his age, going into an expiring contract, yeah, he's not going to fetch even close to the amount that Zach Lavine would, who is in his prime and can actually shoot threes, unlike DeMar. So while I get some big-time Zach fans are always frustrated with the fact that Lavine always seems to end up in trade rumors, and it's mind-boggling to think the Bulls would even consider trading one of their top players who is in his prime for some draft capital, as if we didn't learn our lesson from the Jimmy Butler trade, at the same time, you have to understand it's the Bulls front office doing their due diligence and understanding what his trade value actually is. And honestly, that's what this is. When I have people ask me, do I think that Zach is actually going to get traded? Why does he keep ending up in trade rumors? My response really is, look, the Bulls were not good last year. They severely underachieved. They didn't make it to the playoffs. They finished 10th in the Eastern Conference, below 500. And their 3 best players were actually healthy all season. Yes, I know there were a lot of circumstances that led to their underperformance. Obviously, not having Lonzo all year when the initial thought was that he was going to be coming back to start the season, that hurt them, obviously. Yes, the overall roster construction was not good when you consider the Bulls didn't add shooting. They didn't have anyone to facilitate and run the offense. But that aside, the Bulls, with DeMar, Zach, and Vucevic being mostly healthy for the season, or at least being available to play in games together, because I know Zach had his struggles in really being 100% to start the season, but with those 3 guys being on the court most of the year, the Bulls should have been better than what they were. Not saying they would have been one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, or not saying they should have been one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, or that they should have made a deep run in the playoffs, because the other flaws and holes on the roster would have prevented that, but they should have at least made the playoffs. They should have finished above 500, and they shouldn't have lost as many bad games as they did against some of the worst teams in the league, and blowing games in the final minutes, as the Bulls were one of the worst clutch teams in the association last year. And when that happens, as a front office, you have to be looking at everything and seeing what went wrong, how do we go about fixing it and improving this roster, both for the short term and long term. And taking calls or making calls on Zach Lavine, as it's been reported, they both have happened, is actually smart on the part of the front office. If AK and Mark Eversley were sitting by idle and not fully assessing what the trade value is of their highest value player, then we would have real concerns of the overall competence in running this franchise. You have to remember, last offseason, the Utah Jazz obtained 8 first-round picks, 8, most of those unprotected, by trading away their 2 best players in Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. The Spurs obtained 3 first-round picks for DeJounte Murray. These are not superstars in the NBA. I know some might say Donovan Mitchell is, but I don't consider him to be a superstar, even close to being a top 10 player in the league. But the point is, if those teams were able to get that kind of return for fringe-level all-stars, it would be front office malpractice for the Bulls to not go out there and see, especially after having the kind of season they just did, to not see what kind of haul they could get for Zach Lavine. Now, of course, the trade market is completely different now. I think teams are taking a look at the Wolves, Cavs, and Hawks and what they did and seeing how they mortgaged their future for a first-round exit and thinking, yeah, maybe we need to pump the brakes a bit and not go crazy in trading for an established star, even if they do fit the mold on the roster. You're seeing it now with the kind of return teams are getting for trading some of their top players in the league. But the point is, the Bulls front office should be exploring trades for Zach Lavine and having a high asking price to move him, because it's not like they need to get off Zach's contract ASAP. It's not like he's a toxic player that's asking for a trade or is impacting the overall team chemistry in a negative way, or he's just grossly underperformed relative to his contract. He's still an elite level scorer in the NBA and one of the most athletic players that is in his prime. That should not be a rush in looking to trade off of his contract. So do I think it makes sense that Zach's name keeps ending up in trade rumors? Yes, absolutely. He's the Bulls' most tradable asset, and the Bulls should be looking at all avenues on this roster. No player should be considered untouchable. But do I think he ultimately gets moved? No, I don't. I would say there is a 95% chance Zach remains with the Bulls to start the season. Now, maybe the season continues to go poorly and we get near the trade deadline and the Bulls are struggling or they've even regressed, then yeah, that's a different story. But to start the season, I would be shocked if the Bulls actually trade Zach Lavine. Of course, I might have to come on here and eat my words if Zach gets traded right after I upload this, but I really can't see it happening, partially because the Bulls' asking price is going to be too high, and I also don't think there are going to be a lot of teams interested in Zach. Not as many as the Bulls fans think anyway. But more importantly in all this, which I mentioned at the top of the video, the bigger problem here that I think probably isn't going to be considered as much is how is this going to affect Zach mentally as well as his play on the court? Because if there is one thing we know about Zach Lavine, he takes these kind of things personally. He doesn't forget that he had to go out and get an offer sheet from the Sacramento Kings as a restricted free agent. He doesn't forget getting benched when he's playing poorly. He doesn't forget that countless times his name has been involved in trade rumors, or seeing the reports out there that the front office has wavered in his belief that he can consistently be relied upon as the Bulls' best player and go-to guy down the stretch. At what point does it start taking a toll on Zach and trickling down to his game? We've seen it happen here and there, where he gets in his head and doesn't perform well whenever there are doubts being placed on him, tries to do too much, gets frustrated and complains to the refs, doesn't hustle back on defense. Does it eventually get to a breaking point for Zach Lavine? And could that have a real negative impact on the Bulls if these trade rumors persist? I would hope that he would just take it personally like Michael Jordan used to do, but I have my doubts on whether it would actually get there. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. Let me know in the comments if you think these trade rumors involving Zach Lavine will eventually take its toll on him. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.